We are talking about literature today. So as you know, I've been tearing through Anthony Ryan's work.
Yes.
I'm almost done Tower Lord. I think I have like an hour and a half left of the audiobook.
Okay.
We'll be starting the Queen of Flames or Queen of Fire. I don't
Queen of
remember
Fire,
which
yeah.
one. Like very soon after. And the topic I'm talking about today is the perspective chosen when writing, because The Pariah, the first book by Anthony Ryan that I read, was written in the first person limited perspective, whereas Bloodsong and the Raven Shadow trilogy is written in third person omniscient, which are the two most common sort of perspectives we see in fantasy or even in writing in general. So just curious if you guys have a specific preference, or if once you see like a book written in first person, is it like a positive for you? Is it a turn off? Because for me personally, I had never read a first person perspective until very recently. Like pretty much all the books that I had read would be third person, which is the most common. And then it was actually Mark Lawrence, whose work is pretty much all first person perspective. And the other type of perspective that I've actually never seen is the first person omniscient perspective, where you have the first person perspective from one character, but that character has insight into the other feelings of the other characters around them. I know there is also second person, but I truly cannot even tell you what that is. Like once you look it up online, it's like uses you and they, and it's like I've never read a book that's in
Yeah.
second person perspective, so I don't even know how to define it. So I'm just going to pretend like it doesn't exist for the sake of this conversation. So do you guys have a preference between first person, third person, and then within the third person, omniscient versus limited perspective?
Okay. So first, I guess I was just thinking about second person. I guess the only time I've encountered that is maybe like a choose your own adventure novel,
Okay, yeah.
like, or even like D&D, like the
Mhm.
dungeon master is in second person describing to you what's going on. So
Yes,
like you stumble into this thing and now what do you choose to do? And
right.
then it stops being second person there and then goes into first person.
Mhm.
I choose to attack the goblins. But that's not a book, so I don't know if it really counts. I think most of the things it's interesting though. When you first said perspective, I didn't think of point of view,
Right.
like because when I think of perspective in novels, it's always third person, but it's from somebody else's third person.
Okay, yeah.
So it'll be like uh Bob felt this way and Bob said this and Bob noticed how Samuel did that or this. And then in the next chapter, it's like Samuel went into the bookstore and you're like, oh shit, perspective change. But it's not. It's still in third person.
Mhm.
We're just switching the character we're talking about. But yeah, I can't remember the last book. I'm trying to look to the side here. The last book I read that was in first person, I don't recall. That is an interesting, like, uh, I guess, perspective to go from because then you're really in the mind of the character.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, I can't remember the last time. Oh, I just thought too. Second person might be like self help books, but not really novels.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, what about you, Will?
Uh, I'd say, I mean, well, generally it's just easier to write in the third person. I think when I think of first person, I think of more of like if it's like a diary entry or like a journal or something like that, or some sort of record. Um, I think just third person blended is a little bit better, and I think that's what we see a lot, especially when it comes to like if you have a story that's focused on like character, I guess, development. Um, I think like Harry Potter or like Game of Thrones, where like it's kind of like first person, but this like it's third person, but it's also like inside their head, and you get a sense of like how these characters feel and stuff like that about what's going on with them and all of that. Um,
Yeah. So I
I,
guess that turns into the omniscient versus
Yeah,
limited conversation, right?
exactly.
Yeah. So okay, my answer is gonna be fucking stupid, but I I like both of these points of view, omniscient or limited. but I feel like I like the book to be omniscient, like the whole reading experience by the end of it from start to finish. But I like the chapters and point of views to be limited. Does that make sense? Like, I like that by the end of this book, I'll know how everyone's feeling, or at least have some sort of way to infer how everyone's feeling. But I'm not sure if I'm a fan of telling me exactly what happened and how everyone feels about it. I think I prefer, we're seeing this through the eyes of the character, or at least we have a focus on this character and we know how they feel, but how everybody else feels is something that gets revealed if we revisit the scene from a different perspective, or by them telling us how they feel through the eyes of this character or in their own scenes.
Right.
But I don't know if I don't dislike Omniscient. I just think it's less. I think in fantasy we get more of the limited, because that helps you sort of weave a mystery, right? Like if I don't know how character X is feeling, I don't know how character Y will react to them providing them with information or something like that.
Yeah. I think an interesting use of that like limited third person perspective would be like the Bone Shard Daughter, where we have 3 or 4 different POV characters, but they're all told in the third person limited perspective, where we only have the insight into that one character's feelings about everything that's happening. We get 4 of those different characters in 4 or 5 different locations.
Yeah. And I think, and we spoke about this when we did a review. If people haven't seen it, you can check it out. Obviously love the book, but one of the most memorable things about the book to me is that I felt like I was getting this experience where like it was dramatic irony, where I knew how all these characters who were, miles apart from each other felt, and who they were in context to everybody else's story. And spoiler alert, if you haven't read The Bone Shard Daughter, just skip forward. But if you have, you know what I'm talking about, in that you assume one person is also this person. And when you find out they're not, it's like the implications just fucking cause a shockwave. So that's a really cool experience. And I think we obviously would not get that experience if it was omniscient point of view. That's only done through the limited point of view.
Yeah. But I think how you're saying, when you have a limited perspective, it is easier to create that mystery that's like slowly unraveled. Well, I've found that in the first person perspective, that's even more so true.
Oh,
like,
for sure.
You only have the lens of this one character and how they experience everything in the world, and anything they haven't seen, you haven't seen. And there's no way for you to know about it until they discover it. And like, when that's done well, like it's such a enjoyable perspective. I find like all 3 of Mark Lawrence's trilogies that I've read are all first person, and like it just creates that mystery. And that's like, Matt, you'll read The Pariah, I'm sure. Like it's that like you get to know the characters through the lens of the person you're following, and like how they interpret the world is how you interpret. So anytime they're shocked, you're just like, wow, like a new reveal. And like character development sort of happens to the character you're seeing the world through. And like, I actually find that I am enjoying more and more a first person perspective. I find it more difficult to write. Like, I think it's more difficult to do that well. But once it's executed, especially in like a story in a fantasy or sci-fi, I mean, I've never read a sci-fi in first person, but in a fantasy story, I just think it lends itself very well to telling that story in a first person perspective.
Yeah. I think I'm also a big fan of here's 3 storylines, and by the end of this book, they all come together. Because I feel like when I'm reading something like that, I get so immersed. And then when they finally do link up, I'm always like, oh my God, they're here. They're part of this story too. These 3 things I've been reading are all connected, and they're like all the same book. So obviously
that's exactly like Tower Lord is that right now, where
exactly,
it's like, it's all these 3 or there's 4 different characters that are constantly being flipped through, and they're all in different areas, and you can see they're like pathways starting to converge, and you're just like, I just want to get to the point where they're together again. Like I love that. But then in The Pariah, which also by the same author, that's what I find it so interesting, like learning about the world and the characters happens. It's like, once that character is written well, I never want to leave that character.
Yeah, right.
So like, that's what I found in The Pariah, where like I loved Alwyn, like the main character, and I never wanted to leave his perspective. And because it's first person, you never do. And it just like experiencing it all through that one lens is just once it's something you enjoy, I love, like I burned through that book in days. It was like 3 days I listened to the whole thing. It was just so enjoyable.
Wow.
So,
Man, I can't wait to get to it. I got so much on my plate. What about you, Will? Any thoughts?
As an example of, I guess, second person would be Skyrim, when NPCs come up to talk to you, and that's how you get your exposition, stuff like that, when they're coming to talk to you about certain quests and storylines and etc.
Oh yeah,
they always refer to you as like being the Dragonborn, but they always use that second person, like you should go here or you need to go to Whiterun or whatever.
Have you guys ever found a book written in second? Like I don't know that I've ever even seen a book or like read one written in second person. I can't even like imagine how you'd even do it. Would it be like from the perspective of somebody telling other people what they should do in a?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, you know, again, like just thinking of hearing something in second person immediately made me think of D&D, and therefore choose your own adventure novels, like, you know, telling you where you are, or you feel a small chill on the back of your neck type of thing. But I feel like second person could kind of be uncomfortable, even like that balance between dungeon master and player, where it's like, I don't want to tell you how you feel emotionally about something,
right? Because
those are your choices, right? But I'll tell you your hands are wet, but I won't tell you that upsets you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like the sound you hear is upsetting because it's a terrible sound, but you know, I won't tell you that emotionally makes you feel scared or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I think second person could kind of be like off-putting because, you know, it's really forcing you into a situation, I guess.
I mean, it drops into stories, like you hear characters talking about each other in that perspective, but you never like have a whole story written in it.
It makes me like feel like, you know, when you go out and you have a bender of a night and you black out and people have to tell you what you did last night, and it's always so anxiety inducing because you're like, because like the reason I say like choose your own adventure in D&D, because like then there's some autonomy, right? But if you don't get to choose it all, you're just being told. You know, whereas with the story, it's like it's someone else's story, but when it's like you did this thing, and in the present time where you're hearing someone recount this story, or if you're reading it, there's nothing you can do about it besides stop reading. You know, it's just very invasive. Yeah,
I don't think there's any like specific, you know, you have your own preference, but I don't know if there's a specific merit to doing it one way or the other. There's certain advantages, obviously, to being omniscient or third person when you're telling a story, but
yeah, I think more like I think it's a more modern thing to stay limited or even first person now, because we want to sort of dive into characters now more so than we do like plot.
Yeah.
Whereas I think like maybe with some like not lesser, but you know, simpler sort of storytelling from before, like sometimes it's more about the story itself than how the characters are feeling. I think like even something like Star Wars, like we get a lot of plot, but we don't get a lot of time spent with characters and seeing how they develop. It's like, you know, you farm boy training Jedi Knight, but we don't really see that. But I think some of the more modern Star Wars stuff that's come out, it's like we kind of see some character progression. I'm not talking about the sequel trilogy, but some of the other stuff. I have a question for you guys though. So Luca, the first audiobook I ever listened to was when I listened to Rage of Dragons. So when I got back into reading fantasy or listening to fantasy, that's when I started using Audible and audiobooks. And from that, or even when I read, I guess it's been a thing my whole life, but it really got hammered home with audiobooks, is after I read something, I start narrating my own life for a couple days after. And maybe it's just the way Evan Winter writes, but especially after I read one of the Burning books, I'm just like, he woke up, he was sort of tired and he didn't really want to go to work, but he had to, you know, and like I'll get stuck in that like mode for like a couple days at least, till the point where I'm like, okay, I'm sick of this. This story is so boring. Does that happen to you guys, or is it just me?
I think that's a you thing.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I don't narrate my life like that. I have done that to myself where I like talk about myself in the third person as if I'm in a character, as if I'm a character in my own life. Like
Exactly,
I'm watching
yeah.
myself live. Like I have done that, but not to that extent where I'm like days just like
Oh, yeah, it's not like
Not bad.
constant, like all day, but it's like
No,
I
I know,
catch
but-
myself. Yeah. Like, damn, this shit's really boring, actually. Yeah.
NPC living.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever
Life
like
simulator.
talk to yourself as if you're like multiple people? Like,
Oh
have
yeah.
you ever like done like in like the royal we like we should do this, like you're one person, man. Like,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like I've done that, especially when I'm like, I do for people who don't know, I do tutorial videos of me building things on a different YouTube channel called Keep Making With You. Check out. I just did a thing about Mobile Suit Garfield. Yep. But I often say we as if someone's watching along and going to be doing every single step that I'm doing. And I know that's never going to be the case, but I'm like, that's why we chose to go with the black primer instead of, I'm like, ooh, I don't have a team of people and we decided to do it. Like, it's just me by myself. So yeah, I do catch myself doing that.
I catch myself doing that when I hear those kinds of like king and emperor characters talking about like, you know, like we will grant you this title or something. Like I do that to myself as if I'm like an emperor. Like, yes, we will do this for
We
you.
will have a 2 cream and 2 sugar in our coffee. Right on.
So yeah, I think that'll do it for my discussion on POVs
I love that.
and perspectives.
That was an interesting one. I like that. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Lord of the Rings. Obviously, today, at the time of recording this, we just saw the teaser, I guess you could call it, teaser little